This building here behind us, between the trees, is one of the most famous buildings in the whole country. It's iconic. But what if it wasn't there? What if instead there was something different?
Rest Point began as a private residence, a prime home on a prime piece of real estate. Looking at this photo of the original property, you can see what the coastline looked like originally. It was very rocky and it wasn't that large. Each time there's been development at Rest Point, the builders have been able to gain permission for land reclamation, pushing the borders of the property further and further into the river. In 1939, the Rest Point Riviera Hotel opened, becoming the first luxury resort of its type in Australia. Designed by Keith Wildman, the original Art Deco building had, among other things, a ballroom and a tennis court outside. You can see all the straight lines where the land reclamation has occurred. They did this so they could build, among other things, a large lawn area and a swimming pool that is no longer there. In 1968, following a controversial referendum that saw politicians bribed and the community generally misled, the first gambling licence in Australia was granted. In 1973, Rest Point Casino opened. The dodecagonal Prism Tower, designed by Roy Grounds, is now heritage listed, and 50 years after construction it remains not just the tallest building in Hobart, but in Tasmania. Here is a model of the building now famous. What is less familiar is the alternative working vision of the site. Same, but different. This one looks more like something from the 60s TV show Stingray. It has a man-made island and a focal tower that is quite different. Although this version would require the demolition of the original Riviera resort, it did not require the same extension of land reclamation. Before colonial settlement, the coastline was organic. A lot of the seafront, especially on the western shore of the river, has since been adulterated. Industrial places like the zinc works are stains of pollution, but other places like Sullivan's Cove have been squared off with rulers. In Sandy Bay, much of the sand that the bay was named after is now mostly gone, and instead there's concrete all over the place.
Come here, Dolly. All right, I'll pick you up. So it looks like I'm walking around on the roof of a building, but in reality, I'm halfway up an unfinished building.
The bathing pavilion on the foreshore of Long Beach in Sandy Bay was built in the brutalist style by Dirk Bolt in 1962. Designed to replace the old bathing sheds on the site, the pavilion was always intended to accommodate a restaurant up on the first floor, but for reasons mostly unknown, it was never built. On the outside, on the eastern wall, there is a sculpture by Ronald Sinclair. It runs from end to end. The relief references shapes and castles, often constructed in the sand. Where Elizabeth Street and Macquarie Street meet, there used to be a private home called Lord's Corner. That was demolished to make way for the GPO. Built in 1905 in the Edwardian Baroque style, it was designed by local architect Alan Cameron Walker. His design was chosen as the winner of a competition. There were 8 other entrants, and this here is one of the runners-up. It came quite close to being chosen instead.
There's only ever really been one hotel up on the mountain. That was the Springs Hotel, and it was built up here. Famously, it burnt down in the 1960s, but before it did, the views were pretty spectacular. You could see the city below and the ocean out that way, and obviously the mountain behind us. It was successful, it was popular, but it wasn't very big. There were plans to build a really big hotel up here, but that never happened.
Dating back to the 1850s, there had always been huts across the mountain. People would come up from Hobart and take short breaks in them. In 1907, the mountain's first hotel opened. Made from timber in the Federation style, guests could enjoy croquet out on the lawn or relax with a hot meal from the restaurant. They could not, however, drink alcohol. Legally, the hotel was never granted a liquor licence, so any consumption of booze had to be done on the sly. In 1948, a Sydney developer wanted to build a 150-room hotel at the Springs. The star draw card at the resort was to be an Olympic-sized outdoor ice skating rink. Had the structure been allowed to go ahead, it ultimately may have been destroyed in the same weather event that took out the original Springs Hotel on Black Tuesday. Cities tend to emerge in some ways through a series of accidents. At some point, they become so chaotic that order needs to be put on them retrospectively. The Southern Outlet is an example of this. It was built out of necessity, but in doing so, part of Fitzroy Gardens was damaged and the suburb of Denern was sliced in half. Traffic has always been a problem, and in 1965 a solution was proposed. The Hobart bypass was a concept consisting of elevated freeways and spaghetti intersections, like the ones being built at the same time in Los Angeles. Less evasive aspects of the system were ultimately adopted, but overall the plan was rejected because it was essentially inappropriate. Hobart could have turned out differently. What if Hobart wasn't Hobart? What if it was another city in a slightly different place? To imagine that, all you need to do is go further up the river and across to the opposite shore. And when you get there, you'll find a very, very old dirt road.
So where I'm walking now, there's all grass. There's been a lot of rain recently, so everything's pretty green. But between the grass, there are these bricks, and they're actually all over the place. Some of them are about 200 years old, because where I'm now is the settlement of Risdon Cove, and despite what it looks like now, which is not much, it really was something for a little while, and it's where Hobart almost was. But at this point, more than anything, it's sort of shrouded in mystery.
In September 1803, a small party led by John Bowen arrived at Risdon Cove. This was the first permanent British presence in Van Diemen's Land. The first photograph ever taken in Australia wasn't until 1841, nor were there any talented artists at the settlement, so we have to go on other things to try and work out what the site may have looked like. To the best of his abilities, Bowen made a rough sketch of what he imagined the bird's eye view. Risdon Cove is the fourth oldest colonial settlement in Australia. It's historically important, but in terms of archaeological exploration, it's fairly underexplored. The actual number of settlers living at the location to date remains a mystery. What we do know is that there are a variety of buildings at the site, interesting locations such as rubbish dumps that would hold artefacts, as well as several unmarked graves, one of which was accidentally dug up by a farmer during World War One. Risdon Cove was sort of doomed from the start. There wasn't enough fresh water, the aspect of the land was less than perfect, and the soil wasn't really fertile enough. In 1804, Bowen Superior, Lieutenant Colonel David Collins arrived in the Derwent. Within just a few days, he rejected Risdon Cove as a suitable settlement site. Ordering relocation, many of the buildings were actually packed down and, along with the settlers, moved down the river across the other shore and settled at Sullivan's Cove, where the capital of Hobart eventually came to be. Here is a painting attributed to T.G. Gregson. It was painted in retrospect circa 1860, more than 50 years after the event. It's not actually known if Aboriginal people witnessed the landing, but they were living in the area. In May 1804, a large group of Aboriginal men, women and children approached Risdon Cove whilst out on a kangaroo hunt. For reasons unknown, perhaps mostly just fear, the interaction escalated suddenly and shots were fired by the British settlers, killing and wounding many people. This act of violence was the beginning of a long period of bloody conflict, an ongoing event that would see the near annihilation of an entire people and their ancient culture.